I'd like to call to order the February 12th Planning Board meeting. The first thing on our agenda tonight is the minutes of January 22nd.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the minutes of January 22nd, 2019, as corrected.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next thing on the agenda is public comment. This is, the other thing I'd like to do, also, I'd also like to announce, I'm gonna try to do it all the time, that anytime we're having a hearing, I wanna make sure that everyone understands that there's no derogatory statements made about anybody. All comments are made only through the board, and we try to keep everything Robert's Rules of Order. And so, everyone try to behave themselves and focus on, when you're talking, any issues at all, speak to the board first, and then we'll relay the information out the other way. So any public comment? Yes? Surprise, surprise.
That was a derogatory comment.
I know, was it? I said hello to him first. He's a friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Grant Walker, 71 Philadelphia Street, Precinct 3. I read in the paper, the Falmouth Enterprise, about the Lawrence Lynch Company. I believe, you'll have to correct me on the number, but it's somewhere between, putting in somewhere between 7 and 8 megawatts of generating capacity from solar panels out there in the overlay district. And so I personally think that the people of Falmouth should commend this board, all the board members, and Mr. Bott and the planning department, because I think we owe you guys for the existence of that. I think that's a great thing. I think everybody should commend you. I commend you certainly for that, and I encourage you to do more of that.
And that is the planning board using reasonable controls over solar.
I think so.
Okay, remember that.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. And as I said, I encourage you to do more of that. I hope we have more of those overlay districts.
We
Thank you very
plan to.
much.
We plan to, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Now we have some A and Rs. Approval not required. I have new vision, so I have to hold things further away. I've just had surgery, so I gotta hold them out further. I got perfect vision a long distance here. Okay, applicant Richard Shift Irrevocable Trust Plan of Land combined 3 lots into one located at 102 Nashawina Street. Have all the members of the board had a chance to look over this plan? Everyone seen it?
I just looked at it quick.
Okay.
And doesn't represent a subdivision, so.
Need a
I
motion?
move that we endorse the plan as presented to us, without regard to buildability, et cetera.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Next applicant, Buzzards Bay Coalition, plan of land to create a new lot located on Quistit Avenue. I'm gonna skip the lot number. Have you all had a chance to look at this plan? I was gonna make a joke, but I'm not going to. Sometimes we call these A and Rs Indian swaps when we're moving little pieces of land from one side of the thing to another. It's a common terminology we've used. I'm just not gonna say anything. Any,
I'm not gonna say what I just said.
no, I was gonna say something else. I was gonna say something else, but I won't. You've all had a chance to look at it?
Yeah.
Yes. I move the plan as, excuse me, as presented to us without regard to buildability and all the other clauses we put on it.
I'll second.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Several of these lots are mentioned, new lot 8 and new lot 7. It doesn't indicate in this write-up exactly which lot we're talking about. Can you clarify that?
Well, from my understanding, there was all one lot, and they're dividing them into 2. One's 8 and one's 7, so they're both new. Tom, you,
It says create one new lot, and I'm wondering which one they're creating. Looks like
Well,
lot
the one
7
with
is
the
a new
topo.
lot, and lot 8 is an
but
existing.
Lot 8 is now smaller because of Lot 7.
Well, I
So
understand that.
now it has new
So
dimensions.
this refers only to lot 7.
Correct.
Yes.
It is one new, unbuildable lot. It's
Right.
officially a parcel, landlocked.
Thank you.
You all set, Paul?
Yep.
Motion to do, we've got that, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
all in
move to
favor? Aye.
Aye.
Next item on the agenda is public discussion.
Yeah, and we need to read this.
Okay? Got it there? Take it away.
The applicant has proposed that we accept his plan to withdraw. He says, I am writing, this is dated February 2nd. I am writing this letter to formally withdraw our application for an in-law apartment at 263 West Falmouth Highway. We are doing so because the homeowner's mom, who was supposed to move into the apartment, has taken a turn for the worse, and Valerie no longer thinks that it is a good idea for her mom. Thanks for all your help in this process. So,
Okay.
I move that we accept his withdrawal without prejudice.
I will second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay. Next, moving right along here, we really make, good thing we didn't put times on these things.
That'd be a terrible idea. As I did previously.
Jason Sullivan, site plan review, application for accessory apartment in the basement located at 64 Fresh Pond Road. Let's get these things out of the way. Have all the board members had a chance to review this?
Yes.
Notices.
Notices, please.
Public meeting notice was published on January 25th, 2019, and 12 abutters were notified by regular mail.
Do we have a staff, we did have a staff report on this, right, Corey? So, what I saw in the staff report, it meets all the dimensional requirements regarding percentages of size. It's within the existing structure. It's not a Board of Health issue. They take care of that? Do you have one? I'm gonna watch it.
Okay, the Board of Health says the property would need a larger septic tank, a septic system than the three-bedroom system they currently have, as this accessory apartment would become the fourth bedroom. Enhanced nitrogen removal would not be needed as the lot is over 40,000 square feet. Would not be greater than one bedroom per 10,000 square feet lot space in the Coastal Pond Overlay District. Conversely, the applicant could keep the current system if one of the bedrooms on the main floor was eliminated, thus no increase in flow.
They can deal with the Board of Health on that issue.
Yeah.
Anybody else? John? Pam?
Nope, John just,
Covered you?
he did, like a pro.
What's that?
Well, I have a couple of comments.
Good. That's why we're here.
And it's not exactly in our purview, but it kind of is, because we're approving or not an accessory apartment. But I noticed that the exterior door sizes, one is 30 inches wide and one is 30 feet wide, and one is 28 feet wide.
20 inches.
No, 30 feet,
30
inches.
30 inches.
feet.
Inches.
Well, that's another code there. 6 feet 8 inches tall.
Okay, height, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. So my concern about the width of the doors, we probably don't have anything to do with that, but there's a concern. At 30 feet wide, you would have difficulty moving in some types of furniture, refrigerator. Handicapped person might have difficulty getting in a wheelchair. So that's one. In the plan, although it shows a bed there, and a couple of doors, and kitchen and a bathroom, there's absolutely no closet space. And that I have a concern for anybody who's living there. I'm not sure what they're going to do with their clothes if that's not provided.
An
And it's not our
armoire.
purview. I know, you can do an armoire, but it shows a bed, why does it? So these are a couple of concerns I have about the plan, and I don't know what authority we have to say anything about it.
I don't think we do.
But
I don't think we do.
these are concerns.
It's inside the house. I have also concerns about the drainage, but the house is already there, the gutters are already there. So when I looked at the pictures that were provided, there was some erosion going on, and there was also not a lot of landscaping, but it's already there. The house is there. We're not doing anything on the outside.
Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't, Jim, because the windows are there and the ground goes up to them. So I think we can require that when they take the ground away and build that retaining wall, it can be sloped so the drainage goes away from those doors.
Yeah, because they have to separate.
Corey, they didn't provide anything new from what was in the file. Remember I talked to you, I asked what they were gonna do about the drainage and everything?
No, they haven't provided anything.
And Corey made
Is there
note of
another
that in
sheet?
Yep.
his report, that the drainage is not addressed.
No.
You guys following what we're talking about here? We're talking about maybe holding this up until they come back with
Yeah.
maybe some landscaping and
Yeah,
drainage,
yeah,
because
that's what I was just looking for.
because they were, it was pointed out to them, and they didn't provide anything new on it. John, what's your thoughts?
Couple of things, they do show the retaining wall, and Pat's question about the door, it doesn't show it clearly, but that's 3 feet 0 inches. It's not 30, it's 3 feet wide, 6 feet 8 inches tall, and the other door is 2 feet 8 inches wide, 6 feet 8 inches tall. Just to clarify, and they do show the retaining wall, if that's of any assistance.
The photographs that I saw of the front of the side of the house show that in order to put this in, they're gonna have to do some excavation, and I saw some erosion from drain pipes and no drainage, and I had asked, concerned about that. Do you wanna hold it up and ask them to do that again, or do you wanna approve it?
I'd like to see a little landscape plan, you know, this is a little bit hard to see.
landscape plan.
Hmm?
There was no
Well, yeah, but
plan
even,
for additional landscaping.
even something a little bit bigger than this, because I'm assuming from this that all the vehicles for both units are gonna be in that single driveway.
Yep.
Um,
So we could ask them for parking as well, a little
Yeah.
clarification on parking and landscaping.
Yeah.
How do, Paul, what is your question?
The other concern I had on the south side, there's quite a difference in elevation alongside the building. And if you look at the elevation of the floor area and elevation of the basement, it's gonna need some work there, either retaining walls or something, and it's not clear what is really proposed. So I'd be concerned, I'd like to see a little more information about that.
I had the same.
That area, the external area there, because it looks like they have to do a considerable amount of excavation, which would require stone walls or concrete walls or something. And that's not mentioned here at all.
Should we hear, is the applicant here?
I've never dealt with the applicant, it's been Melinda, so you might want to ask if the applicant is actually here to present.
Yes, would you come up?
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Name?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm Jason Sullivan, the contractor for the project.
Well, the concerns we've had, and I had mentioned to Corey when he did a week ago, and it's brought up against tonight, is there's a lot of changes in the landscaping to accommodate these doors, and there's no plan showing what it's gonna look like. So we think the project is good, but I think what we'd like to see is a plan showing some landscaping and drainage. There was I noted some runoff from the roof causing some erosion in some areas that weren't planted very well, so,
The house has been slowly renovated. There was no gutters before, so maybe it was just from previous
right.
water, you know?
But these doors, there's a change in slope to fit these doors in. From the pictures I've seen before, there's some excavation to make these doors fit.
Yeah.
We'd like to see
basically
that.
Yeah, basically taking away, putting a patio there with that.
Should be,
I wasn't aware about the landscape, that I wouldn't need to provide all the landscaping part of it, but makes sense.
Yeah, if we just wanna see where vehicles are gonna be parked for the unit, the accessory unit.
and yeah, there's the pictures, yes. This is what I was talking about. You're putting doors where those windows are, and so that's gonna be some excavation. And, anyways, a little landscaping plan and some drainage would make it go a lot smoother, I think.
And did you see the parking layout that I drew with the plot plan?
Just that on there? Have you got that, Corey?
Yeah, because I gave it to her
Yeah,
last
it
week.
It's in the file. It's been in the file.
So if I
I'll
may,
pass it along to
I'm
the
sorry, this
police.
didn't get scanned on but this is the layout plan. So essentially, for the board members who are about to see this, as you come in on the driveway, there's parking on the right and on the left side of the driveway with four 90-degree spaces. One's on the left, I'm assuming would go to the accessory unit because you walk around to the left of the house, right in front of the garage for the residents.
Yep, I remember seeing this. There you go, Bob.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
So do you think you could come back with a little bit of landscaping and how you're gonna deal with that one picture? Usually we like to see is an elevation showing exactly what it's gonna look like. We understand the homeowner wants to save money, they want to spend the money, but at least if you gave us a sketch showing, what it's gonna look like.
Yeah.
John?
Also, a little description on the retaining wall. Is it gonna be a poured concrete? Is it gonna be stone? Is it-
Right.
Thank you.
So we have concerns about drainage, parking, and landscaping. Simple to solve.
Right.
Yeah.
All good?
Looks like a good project.
So you'll come back again,
Okay,
okay?
Okay.
cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cranking. Now, the next one's been withdrawn.
Withdraw.
Oh, well, we fast.
Yeah. You want me to read that one?
Yes, you have the withdrawal there?
Yes, okay, the next one, the applicant is the France Hospitality Corporation, and they've asked to withdraw. Please allow the applicant, La France Hospitality Corporation, to withdraw the site plan review application without prejudice. As we have discussed, we intend to reapply shortly in order to accommodate the updated regional policy plan of the Cape Cod Commission. As such, we would also request that the application fee be waived at the time of reapplication. So, then I move that we accept the request to withdraw this application without prejudice. And should I add on that we also would allow it without,
Without prejudice.
well, without prejudice, but without a second application?
Yeah,
fee?
and I think it's.
And waive the fee.
I think it's appropriate to waive the fee, but I would
Okay.
certainly include that in your.
That's what I wondered if I
Yes.
should do that. I didn't know whether that would be with your approval or not. Okay, so that we do this without prejudice and that we waive the application fee at the time of reapplication. Is there a second?
Set.
Second.
All set? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, if I may, this is going to be reapplied. They are going to be applying to the Cape Cod Commission. We do have a couple images of what they had presented and what they're proposing. And if the board wanted to see any of those, or for our viewing audience to see what was,
Because some people are expecting, we're moving along fast. You want to show them real quick?
that'd be fine with me.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ahmed Clower Law Firm here in Falmouth, and I represent the applicant, La France Hospitality Corporation. I know this isn't a formal hearing, but we wanted to, since we have a little bit of time, just kind of do a quick overview of the plans and what's intended for the site. So this is the corner of Main Street and Scranton Avenue, 724 Main Street and 24 Scranton Avenue. It's the site of the former Cape Cod 5 Falmouth branch, as well as the site of the former Seven Seas Motel. The applicant, La France Hospitality Corporation, is a company that runs, I believe, 13 hotels throughout southern New England, some in Florida, as well as restaurants. And they are proposing a new hotel at the site. This will be subject to the Cape Cod Commission approval, and it will be utilizing both the 24 Scranton Avenue and Main Street locations. It will be I believe, an unbranded hotel, so a boutique hotel. We'll have a restaurant located on the Main Street portion of the site. We have we've prepared the site plan. Much of the parking for this will be within the building layout, will be in a parking garage, and then the rest will be located either to the rear or side of the building. Over here, along this board is along the Island Queen parking over here, and this area borders along the existing laundromat, so that will accommodate the majority of the parking for the site. Just seeing if we have, and we have some of the renderings, and we did bring a kind of a spruced up rendering. Which it will be, let me see here. It will be 79 room, we're applying for 79 rooms, which is by special permit of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and will of course require site plan review, but as I mentioned, given the size and scope of this project, it will require Cape Cod Commission approval first, as it is a project of more than 10,000 square feet. So we had applied for site plan review in order to obtain a referral over to the Cape Cod Commission, but did receive word that the commission had, or the county delegates had adopted the updated regional policy plan, and at the request of Jonathan Eidman, the Chief Regulatory Officer, in conjunction with Mr. Bott, it was suggested that we could withdraw and then reapply under the new policy guidelines, which would prevent anyone, either the commission or the planning board, from running into time constraints in terms of a ticking clock for timeframes for work to be done. So what you've gotten right now is about a 30-second overview of the project, but it has been introduced at town meeting when we clarified some of the zoning that was cloudy, I think. Some of the zoning bylaw was a little bit cloudy as to the specific density that was allowed within a business redevelopment for commercial accommodations. We also clarified some language regarding cooking within a hotel room because the way our bylaw was written, it wouldn't have allowed for even a coffee maker or a microwave, which is something that our client has informed us would be really necessary. So that was clarified at town meeting last year in April. And we have been in front of the Board of Selectmen in order to obtain a wastewater, a flow-neutral wastewater variance. And they allowed us to do that. The commission allowed us to go to the selectmen for that first, because we wouldn't want to go through the commission and then planning board and zoning board and then get to the Board of Selectmen and find out that they weren't going to allow us to hook into the sewer. So the commission decided that that would be an appropriate application prior to any other submissions. So that has been approved as well. So our intent is to reapply, if not this very week, early next week, at which point we'll be looking for the referral over to the Cape Cod Commission so that we can begin our DRI process with them. So.
Okay. Paul?
Mr. Clark, I have two questions. One is, we received some photos some views this afternoon showing the view of the dome and from the...
Oh, wrong
This is the
project.
dome.
Not the dome.
This is the
Talking about
LaFrance.
La France.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking ahead.
That's okay.
So we did,
We'll get you next.
Jim,
next
Yes.
one.
I wondered if all goes smoothly with the permitting on the time frame you have in mind, when would you begin construction and foresee completing?
If everything went as smoothly as it could, I would anticipate that we would be completed with our permitting process probably mid-fall, and would begin construction as soon thereafter as we could.
Thank you.
Thinking about 3 months for the commission, 3 to 4 months for local permitting. In a perfect world.
Everybody good? Well, we don't have anything, you're withdrawing it, but thank you for this update. There's no vote or anything to take place. We've already done that, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
and I am going to recuse myself from the next hearing.
Okay. Okay, this next hearing is continued. The applicant is Woods Hole Partners LLC, site plan review to construct a 43-unit residential complex at the property located at 533 Woods Hole Road to consist of 39 market rate dwelling units in 5 buildings, 3 duplex buildings on one 20-unit building and one 13-unit building, and 4 affordable rental units in 2 duplex buildings, Cape and Islands Engineering. Now, last time it went on, and the board took a vote, as is our policy, not to go beyond 10, and we were in the midst of public comment. So Nicole Goldman had her hand raised, and I had to cut it off because of time restraints. So what I propose to do is to start this hearing with any continuation of people, including Nicole, who wish to make public comments on this project, and then we will go to the applicant. So is there any, Nicole, do you?
I have been told that I cannot speak during this hearing, but my husband has some comments.
Oh. I don't know any reason. Do you know, Tom? Okay, I'm,
Spoke last time.
okay, okay.
He spoke last time.
Well, he did, but is he?
I would like to see my word.
That's fine. And I'm assuming he will make your comments for you. Okay?
Jonathan Goldman, 12 Sydney Street, Woods Hole. I do not believe you can approve the development plans as submitted by the applicant because of the sheer size of the development, the scarcity of respect shown to the dome in the site plans, including the placement of Building E just 18 feet away, and the inadequacy of the details provided for the preservation, treatment, and rehabilitation of the dome. These insufficiencies can be evidenced in a letter received by the applicant dated January 24th, 2019, from the Massachusetts Historical Commission, which delineates the many items which these site plans lack. I am providing each of you with a copy of that, and here I will give that to you.
I believe we probably have that in our packet. Maybe not. I think so. We don't? Okay. I do have a copy of it.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
For the file. Actually, it's from the Historic Commission.
In the presentation of the proposed plans, the applicant's attorney has continually tried to point out how the care and maintenance of the development of the dome is not the purview of your board, and not the purview of the ZBA. Whose purview will they respect? That's a legitimate question. How can we get this question answered? Another legitimate question. It was presented here that a full structural analysis and historic report had been completed. In an attempt to find this information, a search was done at both the zoning office and the planning department. It should be noted that what was found is a 3-page report that lacked any engineering study of the structure. Though Mr. Bogosian said here on January 22nd that he has had numerous people up on ladders to reach a 27-foot ceiling, studying the structure, there's no detail on the structural integrity of the joints, sampling of the wood fibers, or additionally specificity in what they have on file. With regard to this historic report, most of the information on file comes directly from the web and the Macris site and was put together at the request of the Falmouth Historical Commission about a year and a half ago. There is little to no new research offered or documented, so that informed decisions about the process of preservation can be made. A lot of what has been provided at this hearing and at the ZBA is a smokescreen for the developer and his team to obscure the real issues and shortcomings of these plans. If they focus on what any opposition may be saying or doing, they can hide behind those arguments to distract from serious problems in their plans, most notably lack of any real plan or materials for the dome. Some vague promises about use and governance, uncertain timeline, unarticulated plans for future care and maintenance, site issues such as water runoff, shadowing the neighbors, a disrespect for affordable housing protocols, and a development too large for its location. Why is my wife's interests in the dome so threatening to this applicant and his legal team? Why has she received demanding and intimidating letters? No, let me finish, please.
No,
No.
Jim put down the ruling, and it's
This
true
is
that
an unfair, you pilloried my wife.
No.
You did.
Mr. Goldman, would you please sit down if you cannot respect what was
But
asked
you're not
of you?
respecting what I'm trying to say here.
Yes, I am.
How is that?
Calling them
Can you
into-
explain that to me?
Yes, I can.
Please sit
I'm
down.
listening.
Please sit down.
Please.
No, please, just
This
answer my
isn't a
question.
debate. This isn't an
I didn't
argument.
ask for a debate.
Just please sit
Mr.
down.
Goldman, I will explain to you, if you do not know what respect is in here without saying something negative about.
There was nothing negative.
Yes, there was.
No, I'm telling you the truth. We were threatened. Do you understand
Then
that?
you need to take that up with other authorities.
What other
Yes.
authorities? Please, maybe you can give me a suggestion.
I don't know. Please
You
sit
don't
down
know.
at this point.
Okay, I'm profoundly disappointed.
Is there anybody else from the public who wishes to speak, have any comments that may not have been covered already in the public comment period? Yes, ma'am, please come up and state your name.
Hello, my name is Becky Connors, resident of Woods Hole, grew up Falmouth, graduated from Falmouth High, put myself through college working at the Dome. My family owns the property to the right of the property and across the street. So 540 Woods Hole Road and 549 Woods Hole Road. I'm currently the manager of the Sands of Time, which is an abutter directly next to the property in question. And I'm here to voice my support for the project. This parcel of land has been an eyesore and a nightmare and has kept me up nights worrying about what's going to happen on that property. It has gone through 3 owners, lots of development, lots of plans. The amount of work that has gone into the 2 builders before and now Mark, this property needs to be addressed by the town of Falmouth, and it needs to be made safe. I know Mark has done some work recently to board up some of the walls, but I would love to see this property developed and made into something that would be beneficial to the town and the village of Woods Hole. Right now, I feel that it is an accident waiting to happen. And I'm very familiar with the Dome. I worked in the Dome for 4 years, literally putting myself through college. I love the building. I think it should be, saved and restored. But I also think we have to look at the project as a whole and what it brings to the village, because it does bring a lot. Right now, if you looked at what was there was a 50-plus unit hotel and a 200-plus seat restaurant. A lot of the people who are speaking in opposition to this say, oh, the increased density is going to kill the village. Well, the increased density was already there. It hasn't increased significantly from where it was at the Nautilus and the Dome in its heyday. Yes, there is additional traffic with the steamship. However, the property as it stands isn't going to increase any further than it had already been back when the Dome was an operating restaurant. So I just want to voice my support for the project. I don't know if anybody has any questions or.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, hello. My name's John Callahan. I live on Walker Street. I have no dog in this fight whatsoever. I became interested in this project back 2 summers ago when there was the Woods Hole meeting down at the community center, and I saw 200 people go to this meeting, and I sat there for a couple of hours and watched them discuss what they were going to do with the Dome and that property when they had no financial vested interest in it. It piqued my curiosity as how it sat there vacant for years. When someone puts financial interest into the property and tries to make something happen in that neighborhood, all of a sudden he comes up against opposition. Myself personally, I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Grant Walker, 71 Philadelphia Street. My understanding is there's going to be a number of rental units, some of them affordable. And my question is, what designs or plans are included for the project that are going to assure energy efficiency and possible use of renewable energy? Thank you.
Thank you. We can't answer that, but I assume the applicant will take that under advisement. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a statement during the public comment period? Okay. Seeing that, I'm going to cease the public comment period and go to the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, again, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ahmet Clower Law Firm here in Falmouth, and I represent the applicant Woods Hole Partners LLC. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Bob Ament, as well as Matt Costa of Cape and Islands Engineering, Mark Bogosian from Woods Hole Partners, Kent Duckham from Kent Duckham Architecture, and Doug Kelleher of Epsilon Associates. Doug is our historic preservation specialist. I'm just opening up some of the plans that were submitted to the board, and we'll go over those momentarily. Following our last meeting, the applicant has worked pretty diligently to revise the plans and to furnish additional information and renderings to the board in order to respond to your concerns and comments that were voiced. The most pervasive comment that we came away with was the relationship of Building E to the dome and how exactly that was to work. In conjunction with that was the effects of the views of and from the dome relative to Building E. So following that meeting, Building E has been reduced somewhat in size, and that was done by altering and shrinking the internal floor plans of that building. The result of this is a shift of that building an additional 8.5 feet away from the dome, which increases it from approximately 18 feet to approximately 27 feet. The setback to the lot line has also increased from 22 feet to 26 feet at the porch, and from 27 feet to 31 feet at the nearest corner, which is located right there. We've also prepared view angles from the dome, from and to the dome, showing both the existing view, which is shown in red on the westerly side, as well as the post-development view angle, and as well as preparing elevation cross sections as was requested, both relative to Building E and the dome, as well as all the buildings along Woods Hole Road. The results of these changes are that Building E will be set back entirely prior to the point of the existing hotel building. So Building E will come no closer to the street than the existing hotel building presently does. In addition, there's an increased distance to the dome and the setback to the lot line, as I mentioned. So if you look at the existing photos, which were taken at the site today, you'll see this is standing essentially directly outside of the dome, a few feet in front of it. That's standing essentially at the dome wall, with your back to the dome wall. The proposed building will be no closer to the street than this present building is today. So I think when you consider that in conjunction with the view angles, you'll see that, the view is not impacted by that building. Building E doesn't change that. There is a slight impact because of Building C, which should be noted is set 20 feet lower than the existing dome. So Building C will be slightly closer to the dome than the present hotel building is, which would result in a decrease in the view angle of approximately 2 degrees. It's a 135-degree view angle presently, standing at the dome. And that would decrease to 133 degrees. As I mentioned, Building D is set significantly lower, so there's only a minor infringement to the view. And a 130-degree view is still a fairly expansive and impressive view angle. And it should be noted that these views are both from and of the dome. Some of the photos we took show essentially the view looking up at the dome, which would be very much in conjunction with what is presently there today with that existing building. So the buildings we're proposing are not going to have a significant impact on the views of or from the dome. We also prepared renderings trying to give you a better idea of the relationship between Building E and the dome. As we've mentioned, it is going to be closer, but we've taken cares not to have Building E overpower or encroach too greatly on the dome structure itself. I hope that these renderings and the elevations that were prepared work to address some of the board's concerns that were expressed at the last meeting. Our engineers have been working with the town planner and the town engineer We believe we've resolved all the questions that were raised in both the original engineering report and the subsequent report that was issued last week. We have obtained a letter, which I have a copy that I can submit to you, from Amy Lowell, the wastewater superintendent, confirming that we may not connect to the town sewer, which is what we had posited, but the question had come up, can we? And the answer is no, as we had suspected. I hope that these submitted plans and renderings address most of the questions and concerns that were raised by the board. As I mentioned at the last hearing, there's been a considerable amount of time and effort and thought that has gone into these plans. We believe this constitutes a more than suitable development for the site and will provide a benefit both to the community of Woods Hole and to the town of Falmouth. I, along with the other members of our team, would welcome questions from the board, its benefits and why we should grant this approval. However, before I cede to questions, I would like to give a moment for Doug Kelleher to speak. And as I mentioned, he is the historic preservationist with Epsilon Associates. And I'd like to have him have a moment to speak to address some of the concerns and comments that have been raised relative to the dome structure.
Thank you, Kevin. As Attorney Clower mentioned, my name is Doug Kelleher with Epsilon Associates. I'm a historic preservation consultant. We've been consulting with the proponent and the project team for about 9 months now, not only on the stabilization of the dome, but also the long-term preservation of the dome. In addition, I believe as mentioned at the last planning board meeting, we've engaged a structural engineering firm by the name of Structures North, a widely respected historic preservation consulting engineering firm on the North Shore of Boston. They're the ones who authored the report that was referenced earlier. That was simply a stabilization report. It's certainly not the long-term preservation plan for the dome. In addition to the stabilization plan prepared by Structures North, the proponent has engaged the engineering firm O'Connell Engineering, which has looked at the current structural integrity of the appendages, the kitchen and the entrance appendage, in an effort to get a better understanding of how those appendages, as they were added to the dome, how they have compromised the structural integrity of the dome. That will also feed into Structures North's long-term plan for the restoration of the dome. I think it's important to note that, the proponent certainly doesn't question the significance of the dome, but I think it's important to note that the significance of the dome, while the site contributes to the character of the dome, it's the dome itself and the engineering of the dome that's truly significant here. So while the impact of the new construction, is important, it's really the plan to stabilize and preserve the dome by removing the appendages and restoring the original design intent of the dome itself. A recent letter from Mass Historical Commission was referenced earlier. We have been engaged with Mass Historic for several months now as part of their regulatory review of the project. The letter that was circulated earlier is not uncommon. I'm sure some of you folks may have encountered Mass Historic's review of projects in the past. It's not unusual for them to ask information, us to provide additional information. In fact, the letter that was circulated earlier was a follow-up letter to previous correspondence that we've had with them. So we fully anticipate going through this regulatory review process with them over the next few months. And I would also mention that, I think it was mentioned at the last meeting, the intention to put a preservation restriction on the dome. That was part of the requirements or the approvals that came from the Cape Cod Commission. We're currently working on that, and that's another component of the Mass Historical Commission's review. We anticipate that they will be the entity which will hold the restriction, which will govern any future changes to the dome going forward.
Pat?
Happy to answer any questions you may have.
But you had a question of Mr. Keller?
No, I don't have a question.
Oh. Okay.
I do.
Paul, go ahead. Paul.
I have a question here. The letter from Massachusetts Historical Commission refers to a full restoration plans for the dome. Would you kind of indicate what you're thinking of in terms of full restoration
So
they've outlined here?
Kevin, the master of the mouse. The intention is to remove the two appendages, the kitchen wing and the bar wing, which were later additions to the dome. And, you know, once those are removed, then where those connections were made, those portions of the dome will be restored, and a small, relatively small addition will be added to achieve accessibility to the dome. I mean, it's important to note that the dome and the appendage that's proposed is really a code requirement for mechanical systems, you know, handicap accessible bathrooms, as well as accessibility to the dome itself.
Yes.
Let me follow up. Does that involve historical colors and fabric and materials, or how
Yes,
extensive is
that'll all
that?
be part of it. That'll all be part of it, as well as a detailed structural analysis of the dome and what components of the dome itself need to be replaced or repaired in kind. But yeah, that'll all be spelled out in
Thank you.
the full restoration plan.
Charlotte?
As I recall, the original presentation on this that was made a few weeks ago, that you intend to live up to the standards of the Secretary of the Interior's standards for historical renovation that are very exacting. So they would cover all of those concerns. Is that true?
Exactly. That's the National Park Service, Secretary of Interior standards for the rehabilitation of historic properties. That's the intent here.
Right, so I
Which is
believe we were
typical of all.
satisfied, or at least I was satisfied then, that the dome would be appropriately restored and that the funding is there to do it. And that's wonderful for the town, that's going to happen. Is it all right to move on to something else
Like
at
what?
this time? Well, what I want to say is I'm impressed that the abutters on both sides have taken the time to come here to the board, the other side last time, this side this time, in support of this project. Glad to see that it's going forward. I think that that's a very important thing to have happen. I also want to comment on the apparent alacrity with which the proposers have made changes that have been asked of them, have been responsive to the community, and have been responsive to this board in asking for the additional elevations, which look very good indeed. Those are very impressive renderings. And I see, it's my understanding that the building, rather than being 18 feet from the dome, is now 24 feet from the dome. Is that right? And move back 27 and a half, so it's more than an additional 6 feet. So that's responsive also. So I'd like to just make note of the fact that the developers are trying very hard to satisfy the planning board, satisfy the community, and to say again, as I said last time we saw this, what a handsome development it is. I like that the village size structures are close to the street so that it will keep that broken roof line that's very village-like as you drive into town.
Is there anybody else on the board that has questions or wishes to make a comment?
No.
Mark?
For the record, Mark Bogosian, one of the developers in the project. I just wanted to comment on, there's going to be a lengthy process that will be costing a considerable amount of money to hire the right experts to make sure the dome is restored properly. Just as it was done previously with the Wise development, we understand that that's going to take time, and there's going to be a very large investment, not just in the actual rehabilitation as far as structure and building costs, but in the engineering that'll be involved. So after we get our, hopefully, approvals on this, that we'll be starting that process, understanding what we're approved to do, so we can hire the right team to make that happen. And Doug quarterbacking that for us, we feel very confident it's going to be a great success.
Ann?
Mark, can I ask you a question? It's just a random question, but if there was another entity for the town, if somebody was interested in having the dome at another location, would you ever consider donating the structure, having it disassembled and then reassembled someplace else?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think part of that would take away the responsibility of that continued preservation and openness to the public. I think this will be a little difficult for the public to access, especially if, as Mr. Ament had said, that these may be broken up into some sort of artists' little spaces in there.
I'd like to say that no matter what, this will be an open development. So this is our goal in this and what we've put forward today is open to the public, that anybody can go walk their dog, go walk around the dome and have different times where they can get inside the dome. That being the case, I'm always open to talking to abutters, the town, the community about other options. And as we move forward, it only gives us more opportunity to sit and talk to people and understand what it is. And if there was a need or a desire for a group to move the structure, I'd be all ears to decide if that's a good fit for everybody.
Okay, I was just one of those random thoughts that I
actually
have
just wanna
sporadically.
follow up on that as well. Mark alluded to the fact, but this isn't intended to be an open development in that any public amenities on the site, sidewalks, if there's a playground developed or if there was ever a tennis court that was developed, which isn't in the plans at this time, but if that were to come to pass, that would be intended for not just residents, but community use. A point that we discussed earlier was that this is not a gated, walled-off community. This is a development that seeks to be part of the larger Woods Hole community.
Right, but you had mentioned that this would be
Potentially artist studios.
turned over to the condominium association, is what you had mentioned at the last meeting, which, if I were living there and I were part of a condominium association, I'm not sure I would welcome the public to come into my space.
So some of the things that we're doing ahead of time is throughout the condominium documents, and it's very clear that anybody purchasing a unit is going to be, that the walking paths are open to the public. And there's going to be certain guidelines that aren't going to be able to be changed by the residents. So the ideas and the concepts that we're here talking about tonight will be continued on for the long haul. The other thing that's nice about this is I plan to retain the 4 affordable units. I say that because that means I'll always be one of the owners that's going to the meetings. This is a project that I take a lot of pride in and that I'm excited to be a part of. So being an owner, not just for the short term, but the long term, is going to, in my mind, help me confirm that the dream and vision will be always what it intended to be.
Well, what you're saying now makes me feel much better in terms of the openness for the dome and the accessibility, because that's not what I think we heard last time. So this certainly makes me feel better, and the thought that if Highfield Hall or some other entity was interested in having this on their property where it was in a park-like setting, and, I don't know who's out there who might be, and they've had many, many years to do it, but who knows?
I would be, as I always am, welcome to talk to anybody who would like to discuss different opportunities.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that, Mark.
I have a couple of questions, one for you, Mark, where you've indicated that it still isn't settled exactly, but the condominium association might have control of the dome. I wonder whether you might consider yourself, since you are retaining the ownership of the rental units, to also retain for yourself the management of the dome, which I think might allay a lot of the concerns of people, since you're going to be managing the
Yes,
4 apartments there.
absolutely. I mean, we're aligned, and when I say we're aligned is, in order for this to be a great development for the residents, they need certainty that that dome will be run and managed in a good, positive manner. So there's no part of me that would ever not be involved until the point in which I wasn't needed, because there might be a potential group, a nonprofit, that wants to step in and take more of the management role. But until that day happens, without question, my staff and I will be excited to be involved in making sure it is run properly, as the entire development will be.
I think that's going to allay a lot of the concerns. And then I have a question for Mr. Kelleher, I believe. You had said there's a stabilization report provided by Structures North. When I look at the dome, and I've seen it deteriorating over the years, I am wondering, will that have to be considerably, I don't know what a stabilization report is, but would that have to be considerably stabilized before construction would begin on any of the other units? Because there's an awful lot of hammering and vibrations and, I know, having just gone through an addition.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
you can't even anticipate, I think, a lot of what might happen. And I also think that, okay, it's 27 and a half feet away from the nearest building, but there may have to be some kind of protection built to say, oops, the shovel went in the wrong direction.
Right.
So what is the stabilization?
So the stabilization plan that was developed was really done this fall in anticipation of this winter. Turns out it hasn't been such a bad winter after all, but we're anticipating, the potential for heavy snow load on the dome and what impact that would have. So the stabilization plan was to just basically prepare the structure for a bad winter so that further deterioration wouldn't occur over the winter. But what you're referring to is essentially a construction monitoring plan for while the new construction is going on site, that appropriate measures are taken so that if there are any impacts, they're addressed immediately and addressed so that the dome itself is not impacted by secondary impacts.
Or would there have to be preemptive structural reinforcements, I guess I might call them, made before construction even began on the condo unit?
Well, I think the intent is that the stabilization plan will be enough to address, any future deterioration in advance of the new construction. But the construction monitoring plan, which I mentioned, would be a plan that would basically monitor any movements with the dome during construction.
Okay, thank you. And John, you had your hand up.
I have a question for, excuse me, the applicant. I just want to understand the statement that you made a few minutes ago. If I understood you correctly, you're hoping to get approval, say a positive referral from the planning board, positive approval from the historic commission and the zoning board of appeals, and then you're going to determine what you're going to do with the dome?
Well, we know what we're going to do with the dome, so that's what's in front of us today. The details are what we're missing. So the fibers of what's going to make up the shell, exactly where each joist is being connected. There's a tremendous amount in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've been quoted by the experts to come up with a very comprehensive plan that is going to meet all the standards and allow us to have a successful renovation of the dome. So what is before us is what we'll be doing. The where and what type of, that dome is a very complicated structure. So knowing the complexity of it, we want to be able to continue on with Structures North and the experts that we've hired to get a very comprehensive plan. So by the time we begin construction, before we go for our permits with the town, we know exactly here's the plan that's happening for the dome, here's what's happening, just as we're going to do and say, here's the structural analysis for the underground parking, for the larger buildings, that there's numerous MEPs that are going to need to be accomplished before we can get underway.
So that sounds really good, but I think there's some people in the audience that have concerns with that idea. And I think there's people on some of these boards are going to want to have this a little bit more defined and get the approvals, and then you're going to show us what you're going to do, and to trust you that you're going to do a great job with it. And I have another question.
Can we stick to
Before
that
you start,
question?
I have a question. On our staff report, it shows that there was a covenant that's been signed. Have we ever, I don't think I've seen a copy of the covenant. I don't know what it says. I don't know if the covenant covers what we're discussing this evening with regards to the dome or not.
Well, I can let Attorney Ament speak to the covenant. The covenant is with
That's
the
why
Woods
I
Hole,
ask you.
is with the Woods Hole Association, and I believe
Right,
we
with the
have
Woods Hole
a draft
Association.
copy of it.
Right.
Well, for the record, since I haven't spoken, I'm, of course, Bob Ament, also attorney for the applicant. The covenant was filed with the Planning Board as well as the Board of Appeals months ago. The covenant, as entered into in 2007, I think it was actually initially with the Planning Board as well as the Woods Hole Community Association. It was entered into as a condition of and before town meeting changed the zoning, so that with the zoning, the town meeting knew that it wouldn't be getting other business uses, that the use of the property would be for housing like this. The covenant does refer to the dome, but it actually, as modified, and by the way, the planning board released its interest in the covenant, didn't ask us if we thought that was a good idea, but chose to do that early last spring. I guess it felt that it should be a private arrangement with the community association. But the first thing to do was to determine if the dome could be preserved. That is, if it entirely had to be replaced, that's not preservation. The experts hired by the developer determined that indeed it could be preserved. It was not to the point that it had to be raised. And we were glad to find that out, and once that was determined, we embraced the responsibility for properly preserving it. Now, what does that mean? Remember, first of all, that during the permitting of 2007 and 2008, and finally with the Falmouth Historical Commission in 2009, all of these issues were addressed. And permits were granted by every one of the required boards and Mass Historic. But they did not have the specifics in those decisions that you're looking for now. Rather, they require a preservation restriction. They required then the decision of the Cape Cod Commission, which is remained in effect. It never expired and has been modified in accordance with these plans. It requires that there be a preservation restriction approved by the Commission and, of course, by Mass Historic. And it also requires a maintenance plan, which will have to be done. And all that has to be done before what the Cape Cod Commission calls a preliminary certificate of compliance. You get a certificate of compliance when you complete a project properly with the Cape Cod Commission. You can't begin construction until you are issued a preliminary certificate of compliance, which means that you have to have done all of the pre-construction requirements. The pre-construction requirements include the preservation restriction. They include the maintenance agreement, and they include a host of other requirements. Marcus said he will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars before he actually does the work to know exactly what needs to be done and very precisely what needs to be done. Those decade-old decisions referred to a plan prepared by a noted architect expert in Buckminster Fuller named Deacon Marvel, who is in fact on the board of the Dome at Woods Hole, Inc., the group that has been interested in the dome. Deacon Marvel prepared a plan, a set of steps to be taken, 14 steps to lead up to the restoration. It did not include the specifics. It included the steps to be taken to determine just what needed to be done, every little step. So to proceed with that process, to proceed with that expense, just as Wise Living did it 10 years ago, we need our approvals. And the specifics of what type of wood and determining what material will work to cover the dome with and so on, that's a work in progress that we will have to have those answers before we get a building permit. And we can't be expected to have every answer to those things. Somewhat similar, but not quite so much, is the idea of the use of the dome. And I'm really sorry if I gave the impression to any of the board members that this was going to be other than intended to be a public space. As much a public space as possible, as much a public space as the public is interested. We anticipate that there will be tours of the dome We haven't had a conversation yet with the nonprofit, maybe the Woods Hole Historical Collection, that might be interested in having it as part of a tour of Woods Hole. We don't know whether those tours would be daily during the summer, less frequent maybe in the off-season, or weekly. You know, that's what does the public want? But the intention is to have the building open. And the idea of art studios was that it'd be a wonderful open space. It was never intended to separate it with tall walls. It's a 27-foot high ceiling. The idea was sections would be for different artists to have, maybe separated by a 4-foot wall, maybe no walls at all. I don't know exactly how it will be. And that depends on what do people want to do with it. It's been suggested it could be a maker space. There's suggestion it should be just left open but available for the tours and educational programs on Buckminster Fuller. We're not really sure. It's what the public wants, but we have a commitment to having it be available to the public. If there's a group that's interested in helping to, in scheduling, if there were docents, that would be terrific, because to the extent there is, it will be a burden lifted from the condominium association, which in fact will have the burden, unless it's taken over by somebody else, of this as part of the common elements of the condominium. And all of the owners of units in the condominium will be contributing to its maintenance. Now, the developer is going to put it into terrific condition to begin with, but we think it's an ideal solution for who pays for this. Well, to have 43 people who have bought into a condominium, 4 of the units are affordable that Mr. Bogosian will own, but we have 39 market rate units. If you buy in there, one of the conditions is that your money, your monthly contribution, will go towards the condominium, towards maintenance of the dome. And possibly there'll be a initial assessment. You buy in, and a couple of months' worth of, or a certain amount of money has to go into a fund for the dome. So we're not sure exactly all of those details, but we have to have that preservation restriction. We have to have a maintenance agreement. We'll have obligations to meet that are ongoing.
So just to clarify, you said that you'll have to have what the dome is going to be made of and look like before you get a building permit.
We really know what it'll look like, although we hope it doesn't look like it looks like now,
Well, we hope that
with the
too,
kind of
but-
covering that it has now.
But building permit for the dome or building permit for the whole project, or can you clarify that?
It's a building, we wouldn't be able to begin the project, any construction, until we had all of these things done for the dome. We couldn't do any of it. And I want to remind you that similarly with the affordable housing, one of the terms of the covenant is that we can't occupy more than 5 units of the market rate housing, which essentially means we're talking about the duplex units. We can't occupy those until the affordable housing is all rented. That's in the covenant. So, you know, it's front-loaded to do the affordable housing. And similarly, I think that the developers would commit, there has to begin the restoration and have, you know, assured the restoration of the dome before construction of any of the other buildings.
Just part of my concerns is we are responsible for design review also. So I really would like to have as many answers as possible, as soon as possible.
Well, I'd certainly,
It's not- I'm not being disparaging
No, I
in
think
any way,
you're
but we
fine.
have a responsibility.
And I get it, and I think
And a
that.
lot of the other issues you've talked about are not in our purview, as you know.
But just as the Cape Cod Commission won't allow building to begin won't issue its preliminary certificate of compliance until they're satisfied about all those questions. We have no objection at all to that type of pre-construction requirement for the, with the Board of Appeals.
Okay, I have a couple more questions if I may.
Could I respond to?
Yeah. You're wanting to respond to John, Mark, in some of his comments?
Yeah, I wanted to try to find the rendering of the dome to show that the structures that we proposed, which is allowing the handicap access. If we can get around. Most of our renderings are focused from the, yeah.
I have it in the other set.
My response is that we have determined what it's going to look like. So we know that obviously the shape of the dome, that it's not all going to be windows, that it's going to have some covering, a white covering. We know that where the windows are located or where they're located today. We understand the style of the windows and the natural shapes that are going to match the character of the buildings. So as far as the design of the dome, we've worked very hard to create something that we're very proud of. Where I have not been able to, and we have not been able to get to the next level, and we're excited to do that, is the next step is getting all the details. And we've confirmed everything can be accomplished by meeting with several structural engineers. But getting into the what type of wood it is and all those details, that's what we're working on for the future.
And John, just an additional comment, Mr. Drewry, I apologize. An additional comment to that is that this will be subject to review by the local historic commission as well, which does review materials. The dome is within the historic setback, so this will be subject to their review in terms of materials as well.
So in our staff report, it says that 4 of the 7 buildings are going to be, our design review is superseded by the historical commission. Is that building E and then the duplexes?
B, C, D, E, and then the dome, so 5 buildings total.
5 buildings, that's right, I wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, four new buildings.
Excuse me, and another question I have is, you showed us earlier the view angles. The view angles that are going to be and the view angles that have been. And in all of the reports that I've read here, from the engineering department and from our staff report, I don't see view angles as relevance. I don't understand
It's
the
something that came up
relevance.
at the last hearing.
I'm sorry?
It was something that came up at the last hearing. We were trying to respond to some of the board's comments about what exactly the views to and of the dome would be. So that was really the intent with this plan. We were just trying to address what we saw as some of the concerns of the board.
So those would be view angles, excuse me, if you were inside of the dome looking out?
We actually, well, this would be
or
essentially from standing
driving down the
just
road?
outside the dome. So this takes into account essentially views from Woods Hole Road, both coming from the village and then coming from Woods Hole Village, coming from the Falmouth Village and coming from Woods Hole Village. You'll see, moving towards the west, there is a view down Woods Hole Road, that's the Steamship Authority parking lot that you see there. So what we're trying to show is, I think there was a concern that Building E was going to be blocking a lot of the view, both of and from the dome, which we agree isn't necessarily, is partially not necessarily relevant to this discussion. However, we understood that the board had a concern about it, and we wanted to respond to that concern.
So the response is view angles of the dome, not view angles from the dome?
Both. It's both, really.
It's both, okay.
Yeah. And this would be essentially if you were standing with your, we took some photographs to show essentially where it was being depicted from. And this would be essentially standing at that triangle right there. So that was from inside that triangle, essentially, and you'll see where that existing building is, and that's where the existing building, that's where the proposed building will be. So that was really an intent to respond to the board's concerns.
and again, this really isn't our purview, but I'm just going to mention this. The times I went to the Dome, the only way you could really get a good view of the water is if you got up from your table and went and stood at the window and looked out, and even then it wasn't spectacular, but to me, I think the view of the Dome is what's going to be more important. So I don't have any more questions right now, thank
Okay.
you.
I'd like to just make a comment that in many instances, this is site plan and design review. And in many instances, it's gone more far afield because this is a historic property. And for us to do, I think, what would be a responsible job, we need some more information than we would normally get under a site plan or design review hearing. So I just wanted to clarify that with people, and I think the board would concur in that, that for us to do what we envision that we should be doing for this property, we need the information. Yes, Pam?
I didn't notice, and we haven't gotten into that detail yet, but will there be parking near the Dome for people who maybe, need access that couldn't walk up the trail?
So there's parking along the access road here, and that does connect to the sidewalks, and that is the handicap ramp that you see there. So you could either go, that would be the primary point of access, and that is a handicap accessible ramp.
And I would point out that in the last couple of weeks, since the last hearing, we've added a sidewalk that extends along that parking that would serve the Dome to connect to the sidewalk on Woods Hall Road. And as we've discussed with the town planner, the developer would accept the responsibility of rebuilding or expanding the sidewalk the entire length of the property, which is 590 feet of sidewalk. We don't think we'll need to replace the curbing, but the present sidewalk there is pretty narrow and can be widened to close to 5 feet. So the developer's agreeable to doing that. To get all the way into Woods Hole Village, the library would be another 870 feet, and including quite a few driveways that are very expensive with the proper ramps and so on. That's beyond the scope of what we can do, but it can do the part of a very substantial portion of that sidewalk for people to get in. And that's the worst part of it, too. Sidewalk is better closer to the village.
And the current sidewalk is what, about 2.5 feet?
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. Charlotte?
Different subject, although I concur, we've been more careful, and I feel we've been satisfied. Last time you were here, the engineers, there were a lot of need for response to engineering comments. And I see that that has happened. We've received that report since then, and yet there appeared to be still not very major things at all, but just, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets.
Yeah, and that was
Still
responded to by the engineering team, was it yesterday?
So they've responded to us, and we're reviewing their responses.
Right. Well,
Second set of responses.
okay, because I was thinking that were we to approve, it could be conditioned, because they're just minor.
No, we're not quite,
We're not there yet.
they're not, they appear to be addressable, but we'd like to have them.
Tom, did you have some comments?
Yes, I did, and I kind of want to circle back to the dome and the preservation of the dome. And all the conversations I've had with the applicants, the conversations I've had at the Cape Cod Commission on the subject of the DRI is about historic preservation in context. Moving an historic structure is a last resort to preserve something. You wouldn't move the dome unless you had absolutely no choice, and I don't know why you would have absolutely no choice at moving the dome. Historic preservation in context. That's why Mass Historic Commission in their letter has asked about, we would like to see what the view shed of the dome is from these areas, from the village and from there. So I don't want anybody to get the impression that we're having a discussion about where we're going to move the dome to, because there hasn't been any discussion about that whatsoever. And it would be essentially anathema to the historic preservation community to say, let's take this historic structure that this futurist had built at this particular spot and pick it up like it's a tent and set it somewhere else. No one has had any discussion about moving the dome anywhere, and I think that it would be, I can't think of a reason why someone would.
Thank you. I just want to also make a comment that has to do, because this is site plan review, that the lovely renderings of the dome and the hillside going up to it, I'm hoping that's real for landscaping and not just a pretty picture.
Well, we have submitted a full landscape plan, and what we tried to do was take that landscaping plan and utilize that plan in the renderings.
Okay, good, because before I saw that 18-foot space, it looked to me like you're just gonna throw some wildflower seeds there, and that isn't quite what I would have imagined for pride of place for the dome.
I think it's important to remember that we want the dome to shine because it's going to add to the development. As opposed to being an afterthought, the dome is in many ways the forefront. It's the first thing you see as you approach, and it's the highest point on the site. It is the tallest building on the site by 5 feet. It's in many ways the focal point. So the applicant doesn't have any motivation to treat it poorly or to not landscape or not to not make that the focal focal point of the site. So there's every intent to complete the landscaping plan, essentially as has been submitted, because it's to both the site's benefit and the applicant's benefit.
Okay, I'm gonna have to take a closer look then, because what I saw is a scraggly hillside because it belonged to the state of Massachusetts and looked like probably grass or wild growth or whatever, and then the wildflowers.
There is a DOT setback there, and, we didn't show that in our landscaping plan, but I think the applicant would have every motivation to work with DOT to make sure it looks
I would think so, yes.
appropriate.
And it has to have the plantings to retain it, so it doesn't erode too. But if you're gonna do a lovely sidewalk there, I would think you'd wanna make it a nice place to walk by also, and that's a lot of work to make a 5-foot sidewalk. You're gonna have to be excavating into that hillside, which I would
It is.
assume is gonna get DOT approval. to
Well,
be able-
any work on the sidewalk would require DOT approval.
Oh, okay.
The DOT owns the road, so.
Okay, is there anything? Yes, Bob?
So, the engineering questions are being addressed?
Correct. We got a reply back either today or yesterday? maybe?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. So it is.
They're not part of this that we have?
Correct. So they got a reply back from Scott's comments.
So I'll hold.
Scott is reviewing those issues now.
Okay, so I'll hold on mine until discussion, till I see
Okay.
those revised plans.
Does the applicant have any other comments to make?
I don't think so.
I have a request to make. Our next meeting is February 26th. We don't have all of the information. You're still going to provide more information, and there's still engineering details to be worked out. So this does not give us a chance.
What additional, I just want to be clear, because I was taking notes, but what additional information are we still looking to be
Well,
submitted?
it's the engineering.
Okay, so that has been
Okay.
submitted, so it's just a matter of having that review
It's a
complete,
matter of
okay.
doing that, but we won't be able to close the hearing and discuss it tonight because not all information is in. Our next meeting is February 26th. And if we close the hearing at that point, I don't know that we're going to be sufficiently able to discuss it. The drop dead date is our last meeting, March 5th, and the deadline is March 11th. I would ask that you consider giving us an extension so that we have it, but we don't necessarily have to use it if we don't have to.
Madam Chair, are we sure we don't have enough information to close the hearing?
Yes, I'm sure, Charlotte. We can't close it until we get this full.
Well, can I suggest that, first of all, the information that's outstanding or that you haven't reviewed, which has been submitted by our engineers, is, I believe, all technical details which they've provided the answers to. And while you might feel you don't want to close the hearing, I would hope you have enough information where you could discuss, and you could even expect to consider the staff's motion at your next hearing in a couple of weeks. I think I don't think it needs as much delay as you're suggesting. You will recall that the engineering report initially was extremely long with scores and scores of comments, many of which simply required some explanation from the engineering team. And they've done a tremendous amount of work to satisfy just about each and every one of those concerns, and then new ones have been raised, new questions were raised, and they've responded to that. So I don't think you're very far away from having everything answered, and I hope that this process could be expedited so that when the Board of Appeals meets in early March, March 11th, March 7th, your decision will have been made by then. I think that should be possible.
What does the board feel? We could close the
I
hearing
think
tonight.
we could close the
pending-
hearing and have our
pending
discussion at the next meeting.
I think so.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
But that's the 26th, and
Mm-hmm.
then we would have to have, by March 5th, a decision.
Decision.
So you believe we could do that by March 5th?
I think so.
Tom, do you think we could do that? Because when we talked earlier, it was like,
Well, we got, as you all know, because you got them in your emails today, like 5 different documents and different images and things that you
Right.
really haven't had a chance to take a look at.
right,
And knowing, and it's not the applicant's issue that we have town meeting coming up and we have hearings for town meeting at our meeting on the 26th. I would like to say, absolutely I could get that done, but I can't say that. And I don't want anyone to feel pressed or rushed on the board's side, because as we know, whenever you kind of leap into action, sometimes you leap into something you didn't want to step into. So I think we made a lot of progress. We've got a fair amount of information, a fair amount of new information that the board frankly hasn't seen much. So I would think that it's pretty reasonable that we could wrap it up in March, but I can't tell you that I'm going to be able to have a full-fledged decision for you folks on the 5th.
So you're recommending that we continue the hearing?
Not necessarily to continue the hearing, but at least an extension on the deadline for the decision.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Up to the board whether you want to close the hearing or not.
John?
I just wanted to mention that at the last hearing, last meeting, there was some discussion for design review on the looks of the buildings and the siding. We haven't talked about this evening at all. In particular, and I know Historical Commission's got purview over 4 of these 7 buildings, but those 2 affordable unit buildings are about as plain as you can possibly be.
That's why I feel we're
So
not
do
quite
we want to
ready.
discuss that this evening, or wait till the next meeting, or make the applicant aware of any concerns we might have?
Oh, if we were gonna discuss that this evening in the board, we'd have to close the hearing and then go into the discussion
Okay.
portion of it. And I would only be willing to, I believe, close the hearing, subject to resolution of all of the engineering questions, to the satisfaction of our engineering department. Because some of these had to do with sufficient drainage. Some of them had to do with width of roads. Now, I recognize all of this is technical, but if I close the hearing right now, then that also has to do with our site plan review. I think you'd concur with that.
I do, of course.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, if I may, with regard to
Yes.
the drainage, the information that we submitted
Matt, you
yesterday.
want to tell them who you are?
Sorry,
Matt,
for the record, Matt Costa, Cape and
I
Islands
don't think
engineer.
to ask all the time, because I know
It's
you
his
are.
first time. Yeah. We were answering questions, and there was some confusion over how some of the HydroCAD models worked. Long story short, there's nothing in there that resulted in a material change. I mean, a design change to the drainage. We clarified some questions, we added some additional schedule of elevations, we said what we do to construction details. We submitted the drainage calculations for the 25-year storm, which is required, and the engineering department is okay with those calculations. The drainage system is adequately sized. It actually results in a reduction, a significant reduction in the amount of stormwater that leaves the site after construction. It's a major improvement. So I just want to put you at ease that there are no pending significant changes with regard to drainage or anything like that.
Okay, because the way that, the report that we have read, it seemed like there could be.
That report often seems that way, but he is just literally going down and posing questions. And a lot of those questions were based on no stormwater discharge from the site. We're allowed to have stormwater leave the site, just no more than what presently leaves today. So it's your pre-construction and post-construction. A lot of those comments kept saying there's stormwater leaving the site. But what it didn't say is that it's actually an 80% at minimum, an 80% reduction in what leaves the site. So these are just comments that are made, and we addressed all of those comments. Had we needed to adjust any calculations or revise the plans, we would have submitted those with our comments, but we didn't. Aside from maybe a minor tweak here and there with some pavement width in front of a parking spot, we don't anticipate any material changes at this point in time. And I mean, I keep saying material, I mean significant.
Thank you for your explanation on that.
I just wanted to comment that we are in no rush to, if there's additional questions about siding, materials, anything else that would help, I am happy with our team to answer additional questions.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that Kent Duckham, who is the architect for the project, is here tonight to answer questions. So if Mr. Drewley or anybody has questions about the design, this is most certainly the evening, I think, to bring it up. And we want to address your questions.
Do you want to continue in that vein, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, yes.
Let's do that.
Because I didn't realize that opportunity was here. It was kind of indicating we can't do things until.
No, we're here, we're excited to continue talking.
Pam?
Mark, can I ask you a question? That, the long driveway down to the affordable units seems to me, and because I can't see super well,
Let me get the topography.
Well, what's the question first?
my question is, what prevents, are there basements in those units?
Yes, there will be.
So, will there be any perimeter drains or anything to?
Yes, there'll be dry walls around those, as well as all proper drainage, so they won't have any problems in the basement.
I just looked at that and thought, it's a disaster
Yeah.
waiting to happen.
No, the topography comes back up before it reaches those.
Okay.
So, that's one of the reasons why those were placed where they were. There was a lot of thought that went into that. As it comes down the hill, it drops off towards the right, all the water runs into that, and then
Okay.
Well, let's get other design issues then on the table tonight. John, go ahead.
On the siding, you're showing clapboard. Are they going to be pre-stained or just going to be weathered, or, not clapboard, but shingles, I'm sorry?
we'd like to have all the shingles be treated with something that's going to allow them to have a longer lifespan than just natural. However, when we get into historic, I think that it's going to be, we want to keep consistency throughout the whole project. So whatever the final outcome, when we get, we'll go through the process with historic, we'll be using that shingle with the stain or treatment on it, all the way down from the affordables right up to the.
So every building will have the same?
Correct.
You're
Yep.
sure?
Yeah, we want to keep all the architecture and the quality of the same level.
Has there been any consideration to mix it up a little bit with some clapboard, and, or do you just want to go with what you're showing here?
We would, there's definitely been some consideration, and in some of the buildings, we definitely have added some really nice architectural details. If we could pull up some of the plans of the buildings that are closer to the street.
So that's B. C. That's D. See, these are units C and D.
throughout these buildings, we've added some details. For example, moldings under windows and the balconies with overhangs, all the different rakes with crown molding. One of the things we wanted to try to do is keep consistent with the area. So as far as adding too many different types of vertical siding, we didn't have that in mind, but it's not something we're opposed to.
The shingling overall is consistent with the shingle style that you have used in all of these buildings. The difference comes between the market rate buildings and the affordable unit buildings is a real change in style. Could you comment on your thinking on that?
I'll start and then I can hand it over to Kent. One of the things that we were trying to do in the market rate unit, or the affordable units, is give them as much space as possible without compromising the size. So when you get down to those units, the topography is pretty flat, so their back deck is right off. You don't need to have tiered, they're not on the slope side. So creating units with an open floor plan and bedrooms above, it lent itself to more of a traditional style building.
Kent Duckham, with Duckham Architecture and Interiors. We're in Needham, collaborating with Longfellow Design Build. So those affordable units are intended to be simple, maintenance-free or minimal maintenance structures. So we did back off and simplify. There's not a lot of trim. There's simple windows and simple siding.
And you felt that they were far enough away from the main buildings that the difference in style wouldn't be glaring?
Yes, so
If you looked at the proximity to those buildings, we're much further away, so that, if we have a 70-foot setback from the neighboring houses behind us, but if you really go down the distance, and Matt, you could comment, the distance between, a rough ballpark between the buildings at the market rate versus the affordable, a few hundred feet. So we felt it was, in the design and the concept between this is not meant to be this is meant to be affordables where they have their own space to play, there can be little children making noise, it's a different style, that's what I'm gonna be retaining.
If the board would feel it helpful, we'd be happy to arrange a site visit, because I think once you're on the site and you see some of the topographic changes and the entry area, towards where the affordable houses would be located, if the board felt that would be helpful, we'd be happy to do so.
Who hasn't been there?
Without that, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Anybody not been there?
I've been there
I've been there.
Yeah.
a couple times,
I think we've all been there.
Everybody seems to have been there at one point or another, it seems.
more than once.
Yes.
No, actually, I am comfortable with the change in design. I just thought I would give you a chance to explain what your thinking is. They're really quite far away, and they're much lower down. They're just on a different place than the rest of the buildings. There's no particular architectural reason for them to look exactly alike, and they don't. And yet I think they're handsomely proportioned, so I don't see a real problem with their design.
Is there any other questions that we can answer towards the design end?
Yeah, looking at building C, B, and I think it's D. That's a little cluster of buildings down at the lower
Yeah,
west
the
end.
duplexes.
Yeah, so you see one of them here.
Now, the style, have you got
These three.
an elevation or a rendering of those?
Yeah, we do.
Because,
That's a street, but I can get you, that's C and D.
okay, because I'm just wondering if, a lot of Falmouth, the Villages and Woods Hole, it's more of an eclectic mix of buildings that were built different times. And I'm wondering if you can't vary the look of the smaller structures to kind of reflect that. Because if you're driving down Woods Hole Road, there's no two buildings are really the same, and even at their location, the location is fine, the way you've got them sited. But I'm just wondering if there isn't some way you could change the design so that they almost look like they're not part of the same development.
And that was part of the intent with keeping the two smaller units. They're not the style of the larger buildings are gambrel, that we chose not to go with the gambrel style.
Yeah.
The other thing we did with those buildings is tried to keep them very low to the ground. That's to serve on many different purposes. Now, obviously, you don't see the garages when you drive by, you're not seeing the first floor. The roof lines are much shorter, but you're also able to see over them, so the buildings that are the larger gambrels have views over the top of those units, looking down over to Woods Hole into the water. So the style, we did, go from gambrel to a traditional, but we wanted to try to give it some curve, some.
Yeah, but the treatment of the siding and the trim and things like that.
I would be very open to the idea of putting some, change of siding, potentially some, wood beadboard or board and batten.
Yeah.
I think that would look pretty sharp if we used it in some of the gables.
Yeah, something a little
I'm-
different, just to separate them a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would be something
bit
that,
more.
Kent, does it seem like?
We wanted them to be kind of uniform and a little bit different. They're on the lower slope, so we wanted those to be lower so that they would kind of step up to the,
Yeah.
to the bigger buildings in the back.
Yeah.
And we felt like they needed to be kind of a small little piece that's unified and not varied too much.
Yeah, we don't want them to look, what we didn't want to accomplish was make small mini buildings of the big building. And we wanted to have it, when you drive and you walk the site, you'll see there's going to be some difference. But we're absolutely open and happy to, submit some plans that are going to show some different siding materials for those units.
The other thing I'm looking at is when you are showing these renderings, some of them are tan, some of them are gray. And I like that juxtaposition. Like, if you made the smaller buildings a mixture, you made those all tan and the larger ones that, I don't know, sheet gray, whatever.
Yes.
It would look more villagey than a very large development, I think.
From what I'm anticipating, I think when we work with Historic on those front buildings, as they're all in that, their purview, so I think that the siding color, material, we're gonna, happy to make some alterations now, and then as far as coloring and all that, I anticipate that being a very prominent part of the conversation.
I think in the same way that you were talking about how eclectic it is when you drive through the village, that no two houses are the same color, although that's probably a misnomer, but how different they are. And I think you have these different clusters where you could do, even if it were off several shades from each other, so it doesn't look monotonous. When you look at this or you drive through, that every building is the same color with the same everything. And it wouldn't take much to sort of make each cluster just slightly different so that it's more interesting looking.
Yeah, and I think that what some good ideas, and I really like the idea of the changing up some siding materials too. Some board and batten right now I think is very attractive, and beadboard's done often, but it can be well received. So I'd be happy to work with our design team to really see if there's some small modifications we could make that would be nice.
Within the historical context.
That was the
That's-
caveat I was
Right,
about to
'cause
add,
they
which
have
is
their
this
own-
is subject to
Yeah.
historical.
But at least in the meantime, we can
Yeah.
do that for your.
Yeah, just to put it in your head.
We'd want to be careful. One, it is the Historical Commission's purview, not ours. And that kind of a hodgepodge is much more of a contemporary touch than an historical one. So it'll be really interesting to hear what they have to say.
We look forward to it.
Could you go to that rendering? I think the dome is in it, but it's got the larger building that's the closest to the dome. I don't know how many units are in that.
This building here,
That's
Thir-
building E.
Yes.
13 units.
That's a stunning looking building. I mean, I think it's very, I love it. I don't know what else to say. I like the
Glad to
way
hear that.
And John, you had a question?
I would just excuse me, I'd just like to reiterate again that the affordable units be not so simple and have the same pride in their look as you're gonna have in these other buildings.
Perhaps when I submit some-
Really, take a look at it, please.
Perhaps, when we look at some siding changes and what we could do, we could look at some modifications to those, especially with texture and whatnot, to give them some character that I think.
Affordable housing should look just like the rest of the
Exactly.
development.
Yep. So I'm happy to add some details to those.
Thank you.
That's one thing, just a comment on Longfellow Design Build is, a lot of their work is around town, you see it. And when I was at Hubbard's Paint, I was looking at the building that they were doing. And I look at little details, rake boards and things like that. And just on the end of the rake board, they've got moldings going along. Nobody does that. So they do pay attention to the little details like that, that I think is commendable, because anybody else just run a rake board down, slap a triangle on there and paint it white and be done with it. And I noticed the little tiny details. That's a lot of work to put a little return on the end of a rake like that, so. And I notice all those little details in most of the work that I've seen, so.
We just had on a side note, we just had a great meeting where I'm bringing some very great details to the new building we're building at 661. And when I met with Harvey Industries about the trim, I was pushing the envelope on, can you get it wider? Can you get more detail? I want crown that's larger.
Yeah.
So I think taking pride in what you do is gonna make it so it's a better product for everybody, and it helps make projects, these are things I wanna be a part of for a long time, and wanna keep doing more.
Well, I think making the progress we've made now with the design questions and answers, I think if it's okay with the board, I'm all right with closing this tonight, subject to getting the engineering details in place. Is that appropriate, Tom? Is there anything else that has
If
not?
the board is comfortable, they don't believe they need any additional outside testimony, then you can absolutely close the hearing.
I'm sensing that,
Yeah.
but I'm wanting to know if the board is okay with this.
Yeah, and
You're fine, okay. Very Charlotte?
And the engineering stuff is things that we can go up to the office and see, or could be emailed to us. And I know all of us have been up to the office numerous occasions to look at the plans. We've had the plans emailed to us. And this has been a lot of scrutiny by us. And I'm comfortable with being able to have a discussion the next time we meet.
Okay, so then we have a comfort for closing the hearing, and I would need a motion to this, closing this tonight, the hearing, and taking it under advisement, subject to all of the engineering details being completed, satisfactory,
And any design changes.
and any design changes. Thank you, John.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Second, okay, it's been moved and seconded, then, that we close the hearing, subject to engineering and subject to design changes. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now, that still leaves us, however, I think we would need at least a 1-week extension, because there are other things on our agenda that will take time, and Tom did not feel comfortable that he could actually get everything in place for you. I was thinking originally maybe to the end of March. I don't know that we'll need that amount of time, but I would like to ask that you request a slight extension
Sure.
on this.
Applicant's happy to grant an extension. If you feel you need 1 week or two just to have, and then perhaps not use all of it, we're happy to do that.
That we don't need to come back and say, oh dear, we need another extension, but if we can move it expeditiously as possible.
So March 11th is the deadline currently.
Correct. Our last meeting is March 5th. Our next meeting is February 26th, which would mean March 5th would be the following meeting, and that's probably a little bit too,
And is there a meeting on February 12th? March 12th, I'm sorry.
I knew what you meant.
March 12th and March 26th.
Okay, so if we can get an extension,
To the 19th? Or the
Yeah.
18th?
To March 26th.
And then if see where we stand at that point?
so.
A week
March
extension.
12th would be probably the last meeting we would need, but then we would need the following meeting to render the decision, I think.
I'm
John?
not gonna be here March 12th.
Oh dear,
I will not be here.
that's not a good thing then, to
Well,
make that decision.
it's a site plan, not a supermajority.
Yeah, I understand, so we could do it without your input.
But he's a smart guy.
I know,
I
that's,
can mail it in.
I liked your input about the design details, so,
We could certainly do until the 18th now and see where we stand at the next meeting, and if we need more time.
Why don't we do that?
We're happy to do
That
that.
would be fine, and then we could ask for a further extension if we needed it.
26.
March 18th?
Just end of the month.
I think,
Was
yeah.
that the
March is
18th?
fine.
March 18th. So you would have to submit a request.
Yeah, well, I'll get something
Thank you.
into the office.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and for giving your input to this. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Good night.
Like I was chairman.
I know I hit the mic with the phone, sorry.
I thought it was Pam.
No, it was me. I was trying to
Did
be
we
real
adjourn?
careful.
Did we have a recess? Did you call a recess?
I didn't call it recess, no. It's still pretty early. Got a lot to go yet.
Wow, we're doing pretty good.
Is that your agenda?
It was
I
way
grabbed
out
one
of
from up
order.
top.
Oh, okay.
I started to say something, but you knew it. You go
Bob
outside.
said something, sit down, and
Bob, yeah,
putting
Bob
more
said
emphasis on what I said, please take your seat.
Looking for the police.
I mean, but
I was looking for the police.
To go tonight, too. The first one is planning board discussions. We have several things tonight. The first one is planning board appointment to the recodification working group.
If I may,
Yes.
I am still in the process of extracting from, or discussing with town council the scope of that. I'd hope to have it tonight before we ask for volunteers.
Okay, let's keep
We're
moving
gonna
then.
roll that back to the 26th.
That's fine. Let's just keep rolling. Committee reports is the next thing on our agenda. Thank you, Corey. So, anybody have any committee reports? Paul?
As you know, I've been attending the water quality management meetings pretty regularly as a planning board representative. And last week, we had a presentation by GHD on the wastewater alternatives that they were looking at. And there were 6 of them presented, and they range from around $5 million to $50 million. And the 2 most expensive ones are the 2 ocean outfalls that were at least being considered, one at Buzzards Bay and one off Knobsco Light, and they were about, one was 50, one was 55 million. So that was pretty much out of range of all the other activities. So they're looking at other sites where they might be able to discharge more freely on subsurface disposal.
What drives the cost of that? I don't go to those meetings. I have no idea.
Undersea construction, so the outfall pipes would go out into the ocean.
Oh,
and
so-
the majority of that cost is building something under the water.
Under the water.
No,
So
they
it's
would
like Deer Island. It's way, takes it
Yeah,
way out.
3,400-foot-long
Well,
outfall.
the one at, one at Buzzards Bay is 4,300 feet. The one in off Knobsco Light was, I think, 1,000 feet. So it's a big difference, but you have to take the treatment flow all the way down to those areas and pump it on out. So it was very, very expensive. So it appears that that's not really a viable
Would they
solution.
bury those, Paul?
They're buried.
They would bury.
There might be directional drilling. I'm not quite sure how they do it.
Yeah.
And what are the alternatives they're considering?
They're considering surface disposal, looking at sites around town where they might be able to discharge treated effluent, like what they do now.
Injected? Or-
Not injected, but just disposal areas like they have at, up at Tech Park. So it was a very interesting discussion. It was pretty detailed, but I at least want to let you know that that committee is moving pretty well on some of the issues that have been coming up, particularly with relation to wastewater treatment. As you know, once you reach 80% capacity, you have to start planning the next round of disposal options. There's plenty of treatment capacity, but the disposal options are limiting what they can take. And as these different developments, hotels come online, they obviously impact that area. So it was a good discussion.
Anybody else? How about affordable housing, Pam? You got anything?
Nothing.
Not tonight?
Nothing right now, other
Okay.
than we're very happy that the state okayed our housing plan. Good news for us.
Okay, Davis Straits multiple family district. Well, we've talked about this a lot. I keep it on the thing. When will we be having the Cape Cod Commission here to talk about doing the RFP?
The expected announcement of the grant is in February. So we're
Weeks away.
halfway through February now, or pretty close to halfway through. It's a short month. But hopefully, we'll be hearing from them shortly about the outcome of the DLTA grant. I don't want to jinx anything, but it's consistent with the stuff that they've been doing for us. I would be surprised if they went, oh, thanks for applying, but you didn't get picked. But I don't want to say that.
Okay. The accessory apartment brochure, I've seen a rough draft of it. Have others, have you all had a chance to look at it?
I
Or it's in the
believe
file?
everybody has a copy.
Yeah, just got it.
Yeah, and as I remember, you're gonna have some examples of the roof lines and everything. Right, there'll be some specific diagrams of the different shapes of the roof and everything?
Yep, I provided those to Melinda, and she should have a working draft with them already on it, so.
Next meeting, we'll have a working draft?
Yep.
Pat?
Okay.
Are we going to do a separate one for detached?
We are.
That's what I thought I remembered. Okay.
Paul?
The reference here to A, B, and C, there'll be a graphic to show what those are.
Right, so the accessory apartment bylaw, specifies only 2 different roofing types. There are definitely at least 4. You got a hip roof, mansard roof, and gambrel. So it referenced gambrel and gable. I mean, you may come across issues where I don't know how you would assess square footage for a mansard, which probably would be similar to a gambrel.
Brow, yeah.
And then you'd have a hip roof, which might be a little different. Could be probably similar to a gable. So I guess we could have, those roof line types as part of the brochure, but in terms of the square footage and how it's calculated, it just references a gable roof, and a gambrel, essentially, so.
Or 100, it goes like 100%.
100%,
50%,
right.
75 and 90, right? There is a 75 in there too, isn't there?
Yes. And it mentions a shed dormer in the
Right.
bylaw, so we'd have a diagram of a shed dormer, essentially.
Some people don't know. I mean,
Right.
that's why it's important.
So that's
Paul?
why the picture, if your house looks like this, take the first floor and multiply by X for the
Yeah.
second.
The mention here is the minimum lot size 7,500. Obviously, you're aware there was a petitions article in front of town meeting to reduce that to 7,000 square feet, I think limited to Mira Vista. So obviously, this is a draft.
Bob?
Remember we had an applicant that came before us looking for an accessory apartment, and we told him that he didn't really need it, that he could make an in-law apartment. And I'm just wondering, I know that this bylaw replaced the other accessory apartment bylaw, but I was looking for what constitutes an in-law apartment? What can you have, and what would be the difference between an accessory apartment and an in-law apartment if it's attached to the building or even within the building? Because I get that question now, should I just put an addition on the house and allow access to the main house? Does that mean I have to do the whole firewall thing, or do I have to go through the accessory apartment process? Or is it just a building commissioner thing? Can I have a kitchen in there? Can I have two kitchens in the same dwelling? So I'm getting these questions now because people are kind of trying to weigh out what direction they should go. Tom?
Well, that's why the very first thing it says on our brochure is your first stop is to schedule a preliminary discussion with the building commissioner.
Right, but
Because there are code issues, and sometimes the easy things to do are the site plan issues. And sometimes those code issues become to the point where people go, well, I don't want to do all that sort of stuff. So the very first thing we want people to do is meet with the building commissioner so they fully understand that there's two sides of the equation, the permitting side from our perspective and the building code side from his. So if someone says, well, essentially that question, if I want to do an in-law versus an extended living space versus an accessory apartment, that'll be the building commissioners.
See, and I thought that could be a question on here, so that someone kind of has a heads up, because they could go to the building commissioner and talking about an accessory apartment, and may not even consider an in-law, and he may not even consider it. But if they came in with that question ready to be asked, you know, what would work best for me? An in-law apartment or an accessory within the structure, or a detached, or, I think
Well,
if
the
we.
thing is about the accessory is they can rent it, okay?
Right,
It becomes a
right,
separate
right.
dwelling. And
Right.
in-laws is just,
But
a lot of times you have doors that go in between.
Oh, I
You
know.
they're-
Oh, I'm-
You walk, you know, it's,
And not even a separate kitchen.
it's not even, or they could, they can have both, but it's, so the building codes are totally different.
Right, but
So-
but the need, you know, someone might think that they need to have a separate
Well,
apartment.
maybe the
where
first question should
maybe
be,
they-
ask the building commissioner, is this, do I need an in-law or?
Well, yeah,
accessory.
and I just wanted to put that bug in somebody's ear. I don't think
That's
we
good.
have
I
to
think
explain it, but I think people need to be aware that there is another way of housing
Right.
someone in your home.
That's a good idea.
Especially in your family.
Yeah.
I think that's a great question, and I think Rod's addressed that before. I think if the apartment shares a wall with the primary residence, then you need that fire separation.
Yeah.
But if you have something like a hallway between the primary residence and the apartment, you
Yeah.
don't need to have, you can have that in-law apartment where you don't need to get site plan approval from the planning board.
Right.
I think Rod has addressed that before, and we can clarify that with Rod.
This brochure should
Yeah.
touch it on.
Yeah, I just want people to be aware of it.
John, and
I did an in-law apartment once before, and it required a deed restriction,
Oh, yeah,
Really?
that it be rented only to a relative.
yeah.
Suppose you don't rent it, and you just have it as an in-law apartment.
but that has to be relative, yeah.
Why would you do that? if you're not
We
gonna-
did it for years, for 8
Well,
years.
I mean, I don't mean take money, but it would the habitant would have to be a relative.
Right,
Yeah.
that's part of the restriction.
You don't have to
Yeah.
rent it, but yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's a deed restricted,
Yeah, yeah.
that it's an affordable unit.
I remember that part when my wife and I looked into that.
I don't know if it's still that way, but when I did it about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
it had to be deed restricted,
Yeah.
affordable, and rented to a relative.
Keep in mind, you can rent 4 rooms out in your house without any special permit at all. Any homeowner can rent out, is it up to 4 rooms?
But that's not an in-law
Doesn't-
No,
apartment.
it sounds
not
like
an
a boarding-
apartment.
A boarding house.
It's
to me.
just sharing rooms. It's not even a boarding house.
Hey, Bob, depends on your relationship with your mother-in-law.
Well, that's where this came up. It was, a friend of mine who had that question.
Charlotte,
Bob, are you suggesting that right where it says, be sure to see the building commissioner, ask about in-law apartments, extended living?
Yeah,
What is
some-
that, extended
something-
living?
You could just
An
have that.
accessory?
Yeah.
Ask
Yeah,
about
ask about.
ABC.
Yeah.
Right.
you got that, Corey? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving here. Development design standards, as we've been moving down this road and we're learning more and more about form-based code, and we start to do design review, it would be a good idea, because we're not gonna take the whole town to form-based code right away, okay? And it could be years. Or never. But we should have some design review guidelines that when a commercial, and we're only opposing this on commercial buildings, we're not telling people how they could build their homes, okay? But if you're coming in one of our business-zoned areas, that we should have some standards so they're not surprised by what they hear.
there's a lot of stuff that we can look at. A lot of towns already have this for their business
Right.
and industrial areas, not the single family.
Right.
They're good, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we really need them so that conversations like the conversation at the last meeting and tonight about design review, it would guide us through it. So we'd have no question, but yeah, we did this thoroughly if we had them. One that I'm sure Tom knows piles more than I do about any of them, but there are a couple that are really great that you can get online that are from Massachusetts towns, so they're
Yarmouth
dealing
has
with
one.
similar
I've got a copy of
situations.
Yarmouth.
The town of Bedford is one, Yarmouth is another.
So our staff will
I
have
can't remember.
that for us soon?
So I just don't know if I missed the transition. Are we talking about the design standards and the accessory housing?
No.
Oh, we
No.
moved on to another
Yeah,
item
we've
on
moved
the
on.
agenda. Okay.
We're moving.
All right, just,
Developing design standards.
We're way ahead of you.
yes, and that is, and as we've talked about, since we are now in charge of design review, we really need to have those. And I don't think that, there are a number of things that are in our zoning bylaw now that probably don't need to be in our zoning bylaw. One of those things like the dimension of a driveway in a parking lot. Those are oftentimes in a separate guideline, a policy procedure for, doing off-street parking and things like that. So I think that our design guidelines don't necessarily have to need to be zoning, but when we develop guidelines for design standards, much like you develop standards for subdivisions, it requires a hearing process with the board, but not necessary action by town meeting. So when we look at what those design standards are, I don't think they necessarily have to be zoning, because then every time somebody wants to do something different from the design standard, then you've got to get a variance.
Yeah.
So we can deal with this after town meeting then?
We absolutely, and we work on these things as we can. As things come over the threshold, we have a statutory requirement to get onto those.
Right.
So we're trying to
Deal with comes up first,
get
but
other
our goal
goodies
is to
in and not
eventually
drink
have
too much
have
coffee in
set.
a day to try to squeeze in some extra hours. So, obviously, anybody who sees something that they like and think is swell, forward it on to us. But if we're gonna be into the design standard business, we really should have, a pretty good idea about how those things work.
So let's have an agenda where that's a big part of it, and we maybe even invite, some architects or other people to come and comment on it. Just have a hearing just on those.
Yep.
Sound okay?
It sounds really great.
Be a great
Bring
idea.
in
Okay.
historical.
With
Yeah,
plans to do
and
this and-
yeah, we might as well talk to historic too.
Yeah, local comprehensive plan says that we're gonna do this.
Yeah,
so
right.
Oh, yeah.
it's definitely on the agenda.
And again, want to make sure everyone understands, we're not telling people how they build their single-family homes. This is
No.
the main road, this is basically Route 28, 28A, our business B1, B2, and B3, or really B2 and B3. B1's all just downtown.
Downtown could change.
Well, it's covered by historic pretty heavily, so, I mean, it doesn't really,
Well, they could add a second story on some of those.
right, they could, but it's still historic. It's their, they have, the historic district, we don't do too much design review in a historic district. We kind of defer to them.
Ah, thank you.
In fact, your reports have even said that before, that in the historic district, they kind of supersede our design review. Yeah, so I think this is non-historic business properties is what I'm talking about, and if I'm wrong,
Yep.
correct me.
The villages
Right.
and Davis Straits and along there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, grant opportunities. Tom Bott, you're up.
Alrighty, we got a couple emails from the folks at Mass Development, from folks at Cape Cod Commission regarding real estate and technical assistance services. So in your flyer, you have in your information, you have a brochure about this real estate technical assistance. It is up to $5,000 to $50,000 worth of value for what those things are, and they identify those particular things that they offer Mass Development in the bullet points you see below. So in looking at what we might consider as potential to look at some real estate technical analysis, I thought this would be a great opportunity to build on the Davis Straits project. In looking at creating, we have the Davis Straits reset plan, which deals with land use and setbacks and constraints and things like that. And I reached out to the chairman of the planning board, the folks on the Cape Cod Commission, asked what they sort of thought about that. And several people thought that that might be a great use of this grant to apply for some additional work for master planning for the Davis Straits area. In the Davis Straits Reset Plan, it talks about on page 54, medium-sized steps. Using conceptual development plan as a guide, the town should develop a consensus and a proposed vision for neighborhoods within the Davis Straits and create a master plan for adoption by town meeting. So I think that looking at, chatting with these folks about our needs and about developing a master plan for the Davis Straits area that includes community input, outreach to stakeholders, including the property owners, and some fiscal analysis as well. One of the things, I went to a Massachusetts Associates Planning Directors Luncheon. We have monthly meetings for continuing ed, and we talked about a redevelopment in North Andover. And this is by the train station there, and it was really swell stuff. And they said, we got this parking underneath, and this is really swell. And it goes, and the parking is about $65,000 a space to build this structured parking. So my first question for those folks was, well, have you done a market analysis to know if you're gonna get the rents that are gonna justify building, $65,000 parking spaces? And it's in the building. But, that's one of those things, and we look at the Davis Straits area and what the fiscal impacts of those things and what sort of market, the markets are like and the research is like. We've got a lot of that information already sort of put together in some of the housing studies that we've done. So these folks, building off of our housing studies, building off of the supply studies that we've done, demand studies that we've done, sort of refine some of those and bring together sort of a master plan and some fiscal analysis. I just want to show you one of the products that they advertised. This was Tremont Nail Factory in Wareham.
Oh, yeah.
So this is one of the products that they had talked about, that they had done as an example. Not to say that these are the people who we're going to be working with, but if this sketch looks similar to some things we've seen before, it's because it was done by the folks at Union Studio, who have been doing our form-based code stuff with us and the Cape Cod Commission. So they were involved in a couple of these things. And in the table of contents, they talk about the things that they had done here, the existing conditions, things we sort of already have, regulatory issues and site constraints, things we sort of already have in the Davis Straits, but the market feasibility, this stakeholder input, some of those preliminary concepts, and some of that master plan visioning for both short-term and long-term. So this is sort of that very familiar-looking sketch that you've seen and I'm not saying that if we enter into this, if we're awarded, that we're going to be working with necessarily with Union Studios, but I'm certainly going to be pitching that when I put the application together to talk about those things that they do. So in this case, in this process, they kicked off this process in December 2016, and here's the schedule that they operated under. So as you can see, it took a little under a year for them to put this together, from the pre-design to the final vision and plan recommendations. So I would anticipate that while we are working on an RFP for someone to do form-based code for us, we could have on a parallel track working on the master plan and sort of sorting out some of these concepts, sort of these areas to help inform the development of the form-based code. And here you see, best for the record, this is Falmouth resident Ken Buckland, very engaged in the town, as you know, and the town he works for now, Wareham. So these are very similar sketches that we see from Davis Straits. Then we get into.
So what's Ken's, is he the town planner in
He's the
Wareham?
town planner in Wareham.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And doing a lovely job.
Wow.
They're very happy with him. I asked him when I came down here, why didn't you apply for the Kingston job? He said, you haven't met the board. He was totally wrong, and he didn't say that, by the way, not at all.
That's cool.
So yeah, Ken's doing lovely work. So anyhow, the market feasibility and the market analysis for looking at those, and I think those are the things that that we typically don't always look at as government. We look at, wouldn't it be great if we could do this?
I can answer your questions. To get a 6% return on $65,000, you need to rent it for $325 a month. So that's big, for a parking spot, that's a lot of dough.
Yeah.
I don't know if that cuts it. That's downtown Boston price. Well, not quite. It used to be. They're probably $400 or $500 now.
Oh, yeah, easy.
But, yeah, it used to be. Why, it's been 10 years since.
So while we've talked about, not having parking on the street, having parking behind, there's also parking underneath. There's lots of issues in looking at, doing parking, structured parking, parking under, particularly when we look at flood areas and things like that. So there's a lot of design and things that go into that. So this was my thought, is that we would pursue this, this strategy in applying to mass development to help us do some master planning for the site, develop some of those that market feasibility studies and things like that, and then come up with some things that help to inform our, I know exactly where I'm going, it just takes a long time to scroll through this. So here's some of the things that, sort of laying out some of the parts of the property, and then how those rooftops and those sketches look in the visioning process, and then the building types as well as we saw on the front cover. So that's what I'm envisioning. If someone thinks that we might want to go in a different direction, I'd certainly consider that, but March 15th is the deadline for this. So it's queued up with the other goodies we've got going on.
So are you writing the grant request?
I'm preparing the grant, yes.
Kim?
And
Charlotte?
I was looking on their website, and I couldn't figure out from what you sent us. I just went to take a look. How much money are they actually offering? How expensive are these to get something that's really useful?
Well, the range of the grants was from $5,000 to $50,000. And so part of that conversation I'll be having with Amanda Chisholm, who runs the program, is about sort of ferreting out what some of these other things have cost and what some of those other things, and looking at, if we take this example, there are things in the Tremont Nail project that we don't need, that we already have as a product of Davis Straits. So, these are things that we've seen that they've done that we don't really need, but how do we kind of make a hybrid of the things that they offer, the things that we need, and the things that we don't need to spend money on already.
Well, in Davis Straits, they've laid out that there will be at least 4 different types of areas. And would we, for whatever they're willing to give us, would we be able to get prototypes or plans, master plans for each of those areas
I
for
think
the
we might get for
ancillary
one.
streets?
We might get one area under $50,000, but we're not going to get the whole thing for $50,000.
I just wondered what you'd get.
Yeah, well, that's why, that's why we're gonna have a discussion about, how far does that money go, and to what extent can we get something done?
Right, because it'd be really good to be able to some of the work you've done, Jim, we're able to picture something going in right along
Yep.
Davis Straits. But these secondary roads that are behind it,
Right.
the more neighborhoody roads, yeah, it'd be nice to get a vision.
Yes,
Yeah.
it would.
Jim?
Paul?
I've always thought that nail factory in Wareham would be a unique place to develop, and nice to see Wareham is moving forward with redevelopment. That's a nice opportunity for them. But this mass development, is this a private sector group? Is
No.
it a state group? or-
Quasi-governmental agency.
Okay, because the website is .com, and I didn't think it was a state agency. I also noticed from one of your slides, it quipped through very quickly, it was Union Studios. Aren't they the same people that did the layout along Davis Straits?
Correct.
Okay.
So, like I
they're
said, it
part
would
of
be,
this group?
it would be very nice if the folks who we were working with might be Union Studios. And the argument that I would make is that because these folks have already done work on behalf of the town, and because they're already sort of into our DNA, they would be an excellent partner for them to work with us on this, because it would be that continuum of work that we've already done. So I think that we might get some benefit, that money might go a little further because of the fact that what we've already done and the products we got going in tandem, in parallel with them. Not to say that Union Studios be working on this with us, but that would be sort of my pitch to maximize the amount of their investment in us by using folks like that.
All right, this looks good. We're going to keep moving. Thank you.
Tom, did you want acknowledgement from the board that, run with it, or You're fine with it.
I think he's already running.
Yeah, I'm already,
Okay.
I'm stretching out.
He's writing the grant, and we got a deadline already in a month.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, or ask Tom, have you posted the form-based code, updated form-based code presentation on our website yet, so the public can get at it?
I got it from you last week. I sent it to Melinda this week and said, can we post that? I don't know that it's up yet.
Barbara, that was for you. Not form-based code. I'm the champion of that. I've been working on it for years. If I've recused myself, I've been spending a lot of time doing it. No, we had it, Barbara, we had it at the town, all the town departments. I gave a presentation to all the boards at one time. So they've already seen it. We've just finished, we've updated, and it's ready for you. And it's actually narrated too. You just have to sit there and listen. You can Well, eventually, but it'll be on our website. It's a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Yep. Okay, general correspondence.
Jim, before we move on, not on the agenda, but it is on our agenda, which is to prepare for town meeting. We were given at the joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board and a couple of other boards that were there, we were given some recommendations by a self-appointed group who thought that they could help us out, and one of their recommendations was to hold a zoning night.
We've talked about that.
Yes, and I am wondering, considering the time constraints and all, that we now have, we have planned our public hearing, I think, is it for March 26th, Pat? When's the public hearing
February
for that?
26th.
February 26th. Is there some way that we could label that in whatever information we put out about it, that is our zoning night, so that people would realize that we are making an effort to respond to them?
And get them to come.
And get them to attend.
Right.
And bring whatever their questions are, and that we haven't ignored the help that they've tried to give us.
So presently, we have emailed town meeting members twice. The first email I sent out was an invitation to the planning board hearings on zoning articles. And in that I said, I'm gonna send you 3 emails because people complain if you send too much stuff. So the second email that we sent prior to our joint meeting was, here's the hearing date for the petitioned articles that are coming up on the 26th. So we've gotten 2 invitations out to them, and if, as Charlotte and I have talked about this before, while someone might say zoning night would be a great idea, we're sort of having zoning night and trying to get people to come.
We want to call it, let's label it zoning night, is what Charlotte's saying.
Right.
That's a label, is all it is. It's just so they get the point across.
Marketing.
I wrote that down to the meeting, to you when we were sitting there, that we would do that, yeah.
So we have had zoning night A and zoning night B, and if we want to try to do a third for sort of a super precinct meeting.
Like all the things that are going to be at town meeting is what my thoughts, that we do a quick review of everything to make sure they're complete. Kind of like the opportunity we had before this town meeting, we had in this room in the daytime with David Vieira and all the heads of the boards, and we talked about everything that's going on town meeting. I think we should do one just planning board town meeting stuff and have that the whole agenda be just on.
And it would include our agenda items, but it would include petitioners' agenda items
anything
that
that's-
deal with zoning.
Well, the one thing I get a little nervous about is when we're talking about things outside of a hearing. So if we have a hearing to talk about zoning articles and we set that date for a date certain and we close that hearing, I just don't want it to look like we're debating zoning outside of the hearing. So zoning night might be, sort of a forum of the planner and a couple members of the board. But I'm just always leery about.
So you're saying we can't have a quorum there?
I don't know that, but I just get nervous about, we have hearings about when we're going to talk about things. We invite people at the hearing, close the hearing. I think for informational purposes, to talk about things at a precinct. When we're at precinct meetings, there's never a quorum of the board at a precinct meeting, but you're passing information along. So just how do you go about implementing a zoning night and still stay in the good graces of the Attorney General?
Pat, when we did the accessory apartment bylaw, we had many meetings. Did we not have a quorum at them? How did we get around that?
No, we had the meetings right here at the planning board to discuss it.
No, but we met at the Herman Room once.
Oh, yeah, but that was labeled one of our
You
meetings.
called it a planning board meeting.
Okay, so it was,
Yeah.
it was a meeting, okay.
A meeting, and then you closed it.
So obviously, when we develop zoning, we talk about things prior to a hearing to get to that point. But
Right.
I'm just always leery of being, out, having a discussion about things with the, outside of the hearing. So I fully understand the intent and the idea, but let's figure out just how to go about
Okay.
doing that.
We'll leave those details up to you.
All righty.
Good idea.
Okay, future agenda items, well, we've kind of already covered that. We got-
General correspondence, we've got a couple of
You
things.
got some? Okay.
Well, they're in here, yeah. There's this, the housing production plan approved.
Yeah, the housing production's been approved. We have a letter from, these are open to anyone to come read too, or anytime, if you,
Got it.
we've all had a chance to see it. Department of Housing Community Development has approved the housing production plan.
And this one is a note from Noreen Stockman, the ZBA is holding a site walk on Saturday, February 16th at 10 a.m. Hearing requested to be held on February 21st per applicant. Applicant had been advised that the ZBA will not have a planning board decision, and this is in regard to 836 Palmer Avenue.
I wanted to talk about that for just a second, if I could. So this is for the campground.
Oh, campground. I was trying to have trouble. I always don't think of that as Palmer Avenue. It's
So
Sipawissa.
this is, so the ZBA is having a site visit at the campground on the 16th. And I was going to suggest if the board wanted to attend the sidewalk, because the applicant is going to be, the petitioner is going to be there. If the planning board had any interest in attending the site walk as well, we'd be happy to post the planning board. It's not necessary to post for a site visit, but I understand it's typically been the practice
I think
that
it's
we
a good
do
idea.
that. So if the board was interested in coming out on a Saturday morning and taking the site walk
Up or down?
at the campground,
No?
we'll
Yeah.
post it.
John? Interested? No?
I can't make it anyway,
Okay.
Saturday.
Pam?
Maybe.
You got a maybe? Uh-oh.
No.
No?
I've been there already.
We don't have a quorum, so you don't have to worry
Don't
about
worry
it.
about it.
Okay,
Charlotte, and maybe me.
all right.
Yeah, I
I've
think
been
it'd be
I know the
interesting.
campground well. I've walked it and already, you can drive out there right now and look at
Sure,
it.
you could.
So it's not something that's,
Been there to visit somebody, but not to sort of, eyeball it,
right.
just to find the
You
place I was looking for.
can drive right in there.
Yeah, you can drive right in and see
Well,
the whole thing.
They have a gate there now.
Well, we used to be able to drive right in.
Well,
And
the handy thing about having
Can walk
the
the whole back.
applicant there is that they can point out stuff.
yeah, and it butts the bike path too, so you can go that way. Okay, so you will get an invitation. You might not have to post it, because it doesn't look like we'll have a quorum. And,
So the warrant is out, and is it true that they can't add or subtract from it now? This is it?
yep,
This is it?
yeah, we've learned that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Future agenda.
Future agenda items. Anyone? We've talked about some already. Anything new? Any new ideas?
I think we got our plate full until after town
I do
meeting.
too. I think we gotta work on getting through town meeting.
We were going to review the explanations. I assume that's part of getting ready for town
Yeah.
meeting.
So I certainly think that if we want to add that onto the agenda for the 26th, if we're ready at that point to talk about those things. I have been doing some research on the impact of what is the difference from 7,500 to 7,000 square feet, and identifying how many of those parcels there are and what, so I'll have some information about that when we get to the hearings as well.
Tom, were you looking at those that were 7,200 square feet? Because the gentleman that we had to turn down, I said most of the lots that are of concern are 7,200
They're
square
going all the way
feet.
to 7,000, so that
Yeah.
would cover it.
They are,
Yeah.
okay.
So what I've done is I asked Bob Shea to give me, we identified the area, this Seward area, and we also identified the area known as the Heights. I found out what the Heights was. I thought it was a Broadway show. Apparently, it's a neighborhood here in Falmouth. I'm learning things every day. So he basically downloaded all those parcels for me, and I put into a spreadsheet and sorting them by owner occupied, by size, so we'll have an idea of how many parcels there are, how many parcels would be eligible as owner occupied, how many are at 7,500 square feet, how many are less than 7,000. So we'll have a pretty good idea about what the impact of that sort of change might be. under that guise of if someone's gonna have a petitioned article and the board may or may not support it, then we should be informed to speak to it.
Paul?
Remember, we had a big discussion on the size of it, and for some reason we came up with 7,500, and I don't remember exactly why we
Working
did
group.
that. I think
It was the
CBA
working group.
recommended,
No, it was
No, it was
the
the health
temporary
people.
working group.
what the working group
But
recommended.
wasn't it the health people, Pat, who really pushed for that?
There
was a
was some zoning
compromise.
people too. I always thought there's enough limitations between having your septic systems and all the other things, you decide if you can find a way to put it on it and it passes, but they wanted to put a limit on it. And I guess,
It'd be nice to know that before we get into this discussion, where it originally came from, and I don't remember that.
Came out of the working group.
it was a compromise number,
But it was arbitrary.
kind of,
Yeah.
So going to 7,000
has a little
is
thought process.
also arbitrary.
No, it is a little bit more thought process, because we've identified, and that's why I was afraid of having it in the beginning, because we've identified the lots in Mara Vista that, we saw that one design, it's 400 square foot accessory apartment over a garage, it looked perfect, but we couldn't do it because we put the
Seward,
yeah, where it's sewered, it could fit,
right.
because you don't have to have that reserve area for your septic system. You really can't, with the 3-bedroom septic system and a 3-bedroom reserve, it's really hard to fit much. Or-
Interesting that that fellow, Mr. Banner, is actually a petitioner for a zoning change at town meeting.
Oh, he is he
Well,
the
it
one?
doesn't
for him.
surprise me at all.
Good for him.
But the
You know,
one that,
there are 3 proposed amendments to the accessory housing bylaw.
Sure there are.
I don't want any spoilers, because I don't want you to be excited about coming here on the 26th.
Okay, that completes our agenda tonight.
I
Move for
adjournment.
adjournment.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.